brace yourself, everybody. The single pack of ground beef that's in your cart could contain the meat of hundreds of cows, blended from countless farms, maybe even across continents, churned together in massive industrial vats. Sounds disgusting because it probably is. But what if you could know exactly where your meat comes from? Today on the Amy Robbins Show, we're diving into the world of so much more than just meat processing. But we do have AJ Richards. He's a combat veteran, entrepreneur, and the founder of From the Farm. With deep roots in a fifth generation ranching family, AJ is on a mission to decentralize the food system, reconnect you with small scale producers, and empower communities through his direct-to-consumer marketplace. So join us as we uncover the truth about your burger and explore how From the Farm is revolutionizing the way we buy meat. AJ, I have been so looking forward to this conversation. How are you doing today?
So great, Amy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and just get this kicked off. Why don't you tell us in your own words what in the world is going on with the American food industry and why a company like From the Farm is so crucial?
Yeah. I mean, where to start? I mean, so our food system has been co-opted over the last few decades, right? There was a time where food was grown by families on 40 acres with a mule, right? That was our country and how our food was produced. And 40% of the nation were food producers. Now, today, less than 2% of our population is growing food for 320 million people, and the majority of our food is imported. Last year, we became a net food importer for the first time in American history. In other words, we're consuming more than we're producing. And so we're in a really vulnerable position as a nation, and it's because a few people have come together to pursue profits for themselves and maximize the efficiency, right? That's the job of a corporation, is to continue to push revenue. And at some point, these companies kind of take on a mind of their own. They don't care, or they don't consider the long-term impact that's going to happen to the people. They just focus on profit, which means consolidating and maximizing efficiency.
Can we talk a little bit about what some of those long-term impacts are? Because I don't think this is something that people are generally sitting around the dinner table discussing or thinking through. They think, well, I can go to the grocery store, I can buy me some meat. And let's be honest, it sounds disgusting that I could have parts of hundreds of different kinds of cows in my meat. But how bad is that, really?
Yeah. I don't, the reality is we really don't know. Nobody's looking at that. And maybe there's no problem eating a package of ground beef that has 5,000 different genetic codes. Don't know. Nobody's bothering to look at it. But it's more about the impact it's having on our nation's producers. That the long-term impact is not having it. So, for example, we only have 87 million beef cattle left in our entire country.
As opposed to what? What did we have?
We're at 1948 numbers. So over the years, we've been declining. So we have the same number of beef cattle in our nation that we had in 1948, but we have 2025 population. Because what's happening is our farms are closing because the small independent producers they're not viable anymore because of the manipulation in the markets by the big corporations. The change of policies like MCOOL, mandatory country of origin labeling. So when you go buy beef at the store and it says product of the USA, it's probably not, because they changed the laws to allow foreign imported beef as long as it was further processed. In other words, I can send a half of a cow from Africa, have it land on American soil, go to a processing facility, and if they just cut that into steaks and ground beef, they can now label it product of the USA. So the consumer has no idea.
You know what's interesting about that? I didn't realize that they did that in the meat world or the food world as well, but they do that in manufacturing. A lot of people that get so bent on, I want my product made in America, have absolutely no idea that still means all the fabrics are coming from overseas. It was probably, I think it has to be like 20% assembled here in America for them to be able to put that label on there, which means they're probably doing all the other hard work overseas, and people just don't realize what they're purchasing and consuming. So I didn't realize that had kind of infiltrated the food world as well.
Oh yeah, a long time ago. And so, a decade or so, you used to go to the store and you would see a little sticker in the corner that said France or Brazil or something like that. And now that no longer exists, because those companies knew that if an American consumer could see it and had a choice, most of the time they're going to lean towards American beef. That didn't help the big conglomerates, right? The four companies that control our food supply, our beef supply specifically, is JBS. They're the biggest. They're Brazilian owned. The Batista brothers are the owners, the Batista family. They actually bribed 1,800 Brazilian officials to get to the size they are. And so they're the biggest one. Then you Brazilian owned. Then you have Morfrig, which used to be National Beef, which is also Brazilian owned. Tyson and Cargill. So those four companies control 85% of our beef market, and they're bringing beef from other countries that's cheaper for them there, bringing it here and selling it for our retail value. So they're making massive profits, and that is killing and squeezing out our American producers.
Yeah, actually, I was just talking to somebody who was telling me about what was going on with Brazil, and I really haven't had a ton of time to dive into all of that. So, what are the implications, though, of that long term in America?
Loss of our producers like we have now, right? 2% of our nation is growing food. The thing that's being talked about the most right now is the nutrient density and the quality of our food, which is an important topic, right? Because of chronic health issues. But what's not getting enough attention that I think needs to is the potential famine that we might see in our nation because of the lack of food producers.
I mean,
You
how
know,
quickly, let's say something happens, how quickly are we looking that we could be facing something like a famine in this country?
oh, just look at 2021, right? So COVID started in 2020. 2021, JBS got hacked by a Russian hacking agency. They had to pay an $11 million ransom a week into it because if you remember when they were limiting the meat you could buy in the store because there wasn't any, that was because those facilities were shut down. They couldn't process. So consider this: roughly 30 slaughterhouses in America process 80% of our beef. Only
Whoa.
30. So if you shut down even a fraction of those, you disrupt the entire American supply chain to where you can't even access beef. So I started selling beef for my family's ranch in 2019. My family are the Bundy ranchers. So I grew up around watching the corruption of the federal government and the pressures they were putting on American producers.
I don't think any of us are really aware of what that was. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, the challenge is that the pressures vary from state to state, right? Depending on where you live, what part of the country you're growing and producing food in. So like in the West where we are, the majority of the land in the West is controlled by the federal government, the Department of the Interior. The Department of the Interior has like the Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, BLM, and then national parks, right? So they're all controlled. So a significant portion, if you pull up a map in the West, is controlled under federal control. So my family are all running livestock on ranches that they have grazing permits for, right? So these permits are historical and they are never to be revoked as long as they maintain their status with that permit, right? They're paying their fees and so forth. But then you get these special interest organizations like all of these environmental organizations. The most corrupt and evil is the Western Watershed. So what will happen is they'll go and put tons of pressure on the BLM and sue them constantly so that they reduce the number of livestock producers are allowed to run on these public lands. So they'll just continually sue them until the BLM caves and then gives into these environmental organizations. So a great example is the Point Reyes farmers in California,
Yep.
right? They did this corrupt deal decades ago where the national park was like, hey, we're going to put this under park ground, but we're going to take care of you. You guys can stay here, yada, yada, yada. Well, here we are a few decades later. They've been put under gag orders, and they're removing all of them from Point Reyes to turn it into an entirely sterile national park. However, they know they need to maintain the ground with livestock. So instead of the farmers who have been there for decades, they're going to take them off and then contract farmers to run the same operation under government
Yeah.
control. Like these are just examples, and it's nationwide from state to state.
Why such an assault on meat and producers? I mean, do you really think that the powers that be want to move us to eating bugs
Yeah.
and vegetables only? I mean, like, what do you think's going on?
Yeah. I think this one requires that We go a little deep. Go a little
Hey, and
deep
this
here.
is Play TV, so go into it. We're not going to censor anything that you say. So I want to hear it all. Lay it on
Yeah.
me.
So the observation that I've made is that big food and big pharma are the same. So if you look at who the primary shareholders are for these big corporations, you're going to
Yeah.
find BlackRock and Vanguard have their hand in everything, and others, right? And so if we look at what they've done to the pharmaceutical industry up to this point, they have outlawed and vilified anything they couldn't outlaw when it comes to naturopathic or homeopathic medicine.
Yep.
Right. So they've either made it illegal because they found a way to put it under some sort of schedule, right? Like, for example, PTSD. PTSD can be healed by plant medicine. I'm a combat veteran. I've gone through some of this. I've talked to friends that have had their lives completely transformed through natural growing plant medicines, but they're illegal because
Mm-hmm.
and these medicines heal. They're not masking symptoms. They're not SSRIs to, make you numb,
Wow.
to ignore it. These are medicines that you actually transform, and you no longer need to be beholding to the pharmaceutical industry. So they've made them illegal. Now, anything that grows naturally, I just took a natural plant class this weekend up here in Cody,
Oh, how
Wyoming, where I
cool.
live. Yeah, all these native plants that grow around, and specialists that say, hey, this is good for fevers, this is good for, all these different things. But when you start talking about that, oh, you're just a quack, right? That's just, the homeopathy is weird. So the pharmaceutical industry did a really great job putting us as the American people away from natural medicines that God has growing here for us to need these chemicals. Now
Mm-hmm.
you start looking at the food industry, and the same thing is happening. They're going to vilify cows. Cows are the problem for the environment, the methane, everything is going to, we're going to cause global warming from cows. And yet cattle and bison, those are keystone species.
Yeah.
Meaning without them, our country is desertifying, right? We used to have, in the West, we had 60 million bison roaming through the West, refertilizing the soil. So by the time they came around the next year, these deserts that we have in the West were not deserts. They were lush grasslands, but we killed all the bison to force the natives onto reservations. And now you destroyed the natural ruminants that created a stable environment. Well, big pharma owning big food now says, how did we make so much profit here? I believe they're putting the same practices in place. So we're going to outlaw all these natural foods, but don't worry, Amy, we have you covered. We've got lab grown and fake meat, so you're never going to go hungry. We've got you covered. So this is where the distinction of food sovereignty and food security come in. Food
Mm-hmm.
security is just, hey, if we can fill your belly because you're starving and you're not going to die from starvation, we've got food security. So our food coming out of the lab that's in a petri dish, that's food security.
Yeah, but that's not food.
It's
That's
not
not
food.
food.
No,
Yeah.
it's not. And it shouldn't be labeled that. There should never be a label that says almond milk. It's not
Right.
milk, right? Or Beyond Burger. It shouldn't even say burger because that messaging for somebody who is so far removed, like in the city, they're going to see that and think, oh, beef or burger
Mm-hmm.
or cow. It's not. It's not that. So they shouldn't be allowed to label it that, but they are, right? And so now you've got this situation where we have so few food being produced in our country that we might not have a choice but to eat lab grown or fake meat. And I kind of wonder if there's actually an intention there.
Yeah,
And,
like an
and
actual, yeah, push for it. I mean, okay, so when did this idea of decentralizing our food, when did that come to you? Like, when did you get this idea for your company? What inspired that?
yeah, so selling beef for my cousin 2019, we would call it, get our next round of slaughter to serve our customers, and they said, yeah, we get you next week. We called March or April 2020, our normal slaughterhouse, and they said, we can get you in a year and a half. And
What
it
was going
was
on?
the COVID supply chain broke.
Mm,
And we were so reliant on supply chain that maximized efficiency for the profitability of a few that it put the rest of us in a very vulnerable position. We couldn't really see it until COVID hit.
mm-hmm.
And all of the supply chain issues across the nation, became very apparent, right? We would see during 2020, you would see farmers dumping hundreds of thousands of gallons of milk because they couldn't get it through the supply chain that was designed for just-in-time process efficiency for maximized revenue, right? Same thing with produce growers. I watched this guy with onions who dumped hundreds of thousands of pounds of onions because they couldn't get it through the distribution. So that was the issue. We had food growers, but because we've become get big or get out, right? Earl Butz promoted that in the 70s. Prior to the 70s, I read this quote from the Center of Economic Development for our country in 1962, and they said, hey, the technologies on farming is coming so far, we can't get farmers off the farms fast enough to take advantage of technology. So think about that. And their goal was to remove 1/3 of farmers off farms in 5 years in 1963.
Wow.
Our government had an intentional plan paid for most likely by lobbyists for these big organizations to get farmers off the ground so they could get larger and control more of it under the controls. Now look what's happening. Now we have this centralized system that has all kinds of issues. And one of the main things people are talking about is labor. With getting all of the illegals out of our country, now everybody's concerned about labor. But if we maintained back what it was, 40 to 150 acres and a family running that, well, you had family units that could produce food for their communities. Now you need hundreds of foreign labor just to manage these massive operations.
What's the mission of From the Farm?
Mission is to decentralize our food supply chain and connect consumers right with the people that grow food. If we can cut out all the middlemen, the producers earn the majority of the dollar, they can stay in business and continue to grow their operation, or their kids can take over because there's actual revenue to be made so they can stay in that.
Are you starting to see kind of a resurgence in your industry by what you guys are doing? Talk us through some of that.
Yeah, that's the most exciting thing is, in order to fix supply chain, you have to have people willing to grow. And COVID stirred a lot of people up and help them see that, this lifestyle in the suburbs or in the city isn't what I want. I wish I could grow food. So you've got this homesteading movement where there's 10 million plus people wanting to get out of the cities onto a piece of ground to grow their own food. That's the path forward. And so From the Farm, the vision is like Airbnb. Look what Airbnb did so effectively to allow a whole new marketplace to exist where individual people could simply rent an extra bedroom or a house very simply, and they built the marketplace for people to find that direct connection. If we do the same thing with farmers, with their food, we can cut out all the middlemen and help consumers go right to the farmers and ranchers so that they're viable.
So what in your estimation is going to have to happen for this to just really take off and be the next big revolution in our food industry?
Yeah. The USDA and our government needs to prioritize small family farms. That's the only way forward. 40 acres and a mule has to become our slogan, right? And that's the only way we can move forward. Right now, the USDA is putting a ton of emphasis on our large corporate farms. I don't have all the cards in the deck to see why they're doing what they're doing. My assumption is they probably know how vulnerable we are, and the only thing we can do to triage right now is to make sure the system that we have is still functioning. We've put ourselves in a place where we don't have a choice. We need JBS. We need Cargill, which sucks, but we are there. So what we're talking about is a solution that is going to take 5 to 10 years. Now, through technology, when you look at what Uber did and when you look at what Airbnb did, I think through technology, we can solve this problem faster than it took us to decline.
Sure.
We have to prioritize it and recognize that it still takes 24 months to take a cow from birth to slaughter, right? So we still have to manage and work with nature, but we need to get started right now, right? The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So that's where we're at. We need to start planting those trees now, prioritizing small family farms. A lot of these small farmers, first generation, which is great because this movement to homesteading, we need people to get back into it. But if they're not supported because the cost of land is so expensive, you're not going to even get people who can afford to grow food. So there's
I
got to be
mean,
some real consideration at the top.
how many acres, if someone wants to get started on this, I mean, how many acres do you need to run a family ranch?
A ranch, you would need a couple of hundred, but you can start producing pasture chickens. I mean, 40 acres is plenty, even less. I know people making a decent living on an acre. They've got a market garden they put in the back and they're selling produce locally. I mean, I've got a friend
Mm.
that's on a half an acre. He's making six figures a year growing produce, and that's his job.
What?
Yeah. Yeah. So it can be viable. Now the challenge is the the challenge to grow food is enough, right? If you're a farmer or a rancher, that is trying to figure out how to manage the weather, how to, deal with all the policies, all of these things. That's a hard enough job. Now you add on top of that the marketing, the logistics, the sales, it's too much. So just like
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned with Airbnb, we fixed the middle parts to make that part easier. If we
Yep.
bring customers to a platform like From the Farm where they know they can shake the hand that feeds them, that simplifies all those middle pieces for them so they can focus on the production of food and consumers can benefit from that.
How many farmers do you guys have signed up, and how many customers right now are you guys? I mean, are we talking like across the entire country? Is this localized to a certain area right now, or is it open everywhere?
Yeah, so we're nationwide. We've got about 85 producers across the country. So we just launched our MVP last year, getting the ball rolling.
Okay.
We've served over 200 customers across the nation as we're testing the software, making sure it all works. But what's really neat is to see that we've served customers in almost 2/3 of our states. So
Yeah.
we've been able to start making those connections and really see that this people want it, this is needed. Now it's just time to grow it.
Well, it's not like I have to order just from somebody in Texas, right? I mean,
Nope.
at this point, we're shipping all over the country, which is also beautiful because you're connecting these farmers and ranchers with people who would have never heard about them.
Right.
And okay, that is fantastic. So where do people go to? Is this a membership thing? Do people have to sign up for this? Like, how does this work?
Yeah, they just go to fromthefarm.org. You can set up an account. It's free to be there.
Okay.
We just want you to connect. You go on there and it'll use your current location to show you the people closest to you. But like you mentioned, you can shop from anybody that's on there that is shipping. Some of these producers have figured out the logistics so they can ship wherever. So you might be in a place like Phoenix, Arizona, or New York City, where you're not going to find somebody local raising beef, right?
Mm-hmm.
The landmass doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So you're going to need regional support. We have parts of our country that need regional support. You know, where I live in Cody, Wyoming, there's only 500,000 people in our entire state, but there's like 2 million head of cattle. So our local ranchers here don't really have a market to sell to. But Phoenix, Arizona, they don't have enough fat cattle to even feed a fraction of their city. And they're
Mm-hmm.
in a desert, so we can get Montana and Wyoming beef straight south, which reduces the distance traveled, which is good for all kinds of different reasons. And people can build that resiliency and stability in their region by connecting with these local producers.
So if people are wanting to buy direct and you're cutting out the middleman, does that essentially drop the price of beef, or are you still seeing people pay more in order to know exactly where their meat is coming from?
Yeah, the prices on meat won't drop until we increase production,
Mm,
right? We still only have 1948 numbers.
that's
So
crazy.
supply and demand, right? And so until we increase the number of producers in our nation, prices won't level out. The
Hmm.
other side of it too, though, is the price you're paying for producers is about what you're paying at a restaurant or a grocery store. People don't have a problem paying them, but they don't realize the producer needs that retail dollar to be viable. So you're okay paying for a, $90 steak at a high-end restaurant, but not to the producer who's literally relying on that to stay viable. So consumers also have to become educated in their own. We used to spend 30% of our budget. This is, back in our grandparents' days. We spent 30% of our budget on food and 8% on healthcare. Now we flip it,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're buying cheap food, 8% of our budget roughly on food because it's highly processed cheap. But now what are we doing with our health? Now you're in your 40s and 50s and you're chronically ill. You can't work like you used to. You can't be as productive as you used to. You can't create resources anymore because you're sick and unhealthy. So the cost for you is going to be worse long term by trying to buy cheap food, right?
Yeah.
One of my favorite sayings is you pay the farmer now or you pay Pharma later. It's
That's
just the,
so true. That's great. I'm gonna steal that. I'm
yeah,
taking that one. I'm gonna give
yeah.
you credit for that. That's really good, AJ. So I did something a little different on this one because I don't know if you know this, but there's some super fans here in our Pulse Media offices that have been following you for a long time. They follow they're all into like the food nanny and
Yeah.
all these people. And so they're the ones that turned me on to you. And they said, okay, can we give you some questions to ask him
All
that
right.
we want to
Cool.
know? And I said, absolutely. So I want to go through some of these questions with you. And actually, as I was reading them, I'm like, these are really good questions. It's just some things I had never really thought of myself.
Awesome.
Okay. So, and this is from Olivia. Olivia, I'm giving you a shout out here because Olivia really wants to know what is the difference between grass fed and grass finished, and why does it matter nutritionally or ethically?
Great question. So I've seen reports from this group out of Utah, Utah State University. They've got the Bionutrient Health Institute. So I have two different producer friends that have submitted their beef to be tested for its nutrient density. And these are producers that raise regeneratively. Now, in the context of regenerative, when we talk about forage, the grass that the cow is eating, regenerative is focused on what would be natural here. It's not monocrop alfalfa, right? It's
Okay.
not one entire field of alfalfa. That wasn't what grew naturally. There were 18 plus species of grasses that were growing in those areas naturally. So when animals are eating a diversity of forage and they test their meat, they find significant increases in phytonutrients, essential and non-essential amino acids, and the omega-3 to 6 ratios are perfect. They're like dialed right in. So you get this higher nutrient profile in regeneratively raised and finished. Now,
Okay.
grass-fed, this is where labels and everything get really confusing for consumers. Grass-fed and grass-finished does not necessarily mean they were on pasture during their whole life. It doesn't mean they got a diversity. It just means they were fed a forage to finish them. That would be sort of in what I've seen your kind of your next step down. Still great, still really good, but your next step down because it didn't have the diversity of species. So you're still getting those benefits. It's going to cost you more typically because they're still finishing it slower, right? You can't pack on the weight with corn and like you can with corn and grain. And so there's more time there, so it costs a little bit more. Then you get into your corn and grain finished beef, where they'll finish in the last few months on to kind of put some marbling in the meat, and it's going to be a little less nutritionally dense when it comes to what you get out of the forage. But there's also evidence to show that you get some other things like vitamin K and so forth out of corn and grain. But if you then keep that animal like in the traditional feedlots for the big corporations, they buy them as calves and they stay in there for months and months and months. What happens is you start flushing out the omega-3s and the omega-6s rise. It would be no different than a human eating just carbs, right? If all you ate was carbs, what's going to happen? So when you eat an animal that spent 6 to 9 months on grain and whatever in the feedlot, you're buying an animal that if they left that animal in the feedlot forever to see how long it would last, just like a human, its lifespan is going to be much shorter than one that's eating healthy and doing the right things to be healthy, right? So those are the differences.
So what should you look for? I mean, like when you're looking at labels, like you even said it, the labels are deceptive. So how can you be a more informed, smarter consumer when you're looking at these labels? What should we be aware of when we're trying to figure out what kind of meat we should buy?
That's why we built From the Farm.
There you go.
If you shake the hand that feeds you, if you can talk right to the farmer and rancher, who cares what's on the label? Ask them. Have a list of things that matter to you as the consumer and say, here's things that matter. And then they will respond and you can then understand right from them how they're doing that. And so who cares about the label?
Amazing. Yeah, that's okay. That's awesome. So another question that they asked me is back to labels, when meat is labeled natural or all natural, what does that actually mean, if anything? I mean, shouldn't our meat be natural?
Yeah. All natural refers to whether or not they've implanted hormones to have them grow faster, right? So
Okay.
there are operations out there. They'll put an implant in the ear that's it's a steroid that helps them grow faster. And again, it's process efficiency. These companies are trying to move things through as fast as possible to maximize profit. So they put these implants in, and now they are no longer all natural because they've got added hormones. Now, depending on which research you're reading and who paid for it, right? There's nothing to worry about. But then you can read other research where people's like, wait a minute, we're not funded by the people that are trying to make all the money. And actually, there are trace elements of hormones that can cause problems for our consumers, right? And with all the health problems we have now, why would we rule that out as a possibility? So I just want something that's growing naturally, that's going to be respectful to nature, take the time it takes, and that's what I'm going to consume for my family.
I mean, when I read chicken packages
Mm-hmm.
from the store, it always says grown with, I think it says something to the effect of like, we can't put hormones into these chickens, or like it says something to that effect. But are you saying that's not the case?
Yeah, when it comes to chickens, I mean, we raise our own at my house. We raise enough to fill our freezer for one a week. We raise them, process them, put them in our freezer at our house. And last year, a couple of years, we've done what's called Cornish cross chickens, which is what most people are consuming. They're not necessarily pumped with hormones, but they have been selectively bred for so long that when we raise Cornish cross, if we don't process them right at 8 weeks, they start dying under their own weight. They break their legs under their own weight.
Whoa.
And I'm not overfeeding them. This is just their daily, because they've manipulated that animal so much that it's going to die if I don't kill it right then. This year we went with something way different because that just didn't feel right to me after a couple of times. So we're going with a much smaller bird, a Freedom Ranger. They don't get as heavy, but we can process them on our own time because it's more of a natural bird. And so again, what they're trying to do is maximize weight, right? If I can manipulate the genetics of this animal so I get 10 pounds versus 5, that's good for me as a seller because I'm making money off of weight. Do I really know the long-term implications of what's going on in that? Not really.
Yeah. Have you been seeing this viral question going around TikTok where everyone's worried about like their eggs hatching
Oh,
that they
no.
get that
That's
they get
funny.
from the store? Yeah,
Oh my
they're
gosh.
they're like, wait a minute, if we leave these out of the refrigerator, could we actually like hatch an egg? I don't think people really realize.
I wish it was that easy.
Right, right. I mean the process of all that. Okay, a couple other things here.
Yeah.
So, are there any labels or claims on meat packaging that are more marketing than meaning?
Yeah. Grass-fed. Because
Okay.
as the consumer, if you don't know any better, you read a label that says grass-fed. Every animal is grass-fed. They only have to be on grass 50% of their life to be considered grass-fed. So you, the consumer, you think you're being smart. You think you want, you know, because of the research you've done, that grass finished is better for you for the nutrient value. So you go to the store and you see a package that says grass-fed, and you assume that means finished. But unless
Okay.
it says grass-fed and finished, or unless it says grass-finished, it was probably finished on corn and grain, and they're just omitting that.
So you need to look for what it's been finished on.
Yep.
And even then, if it says that and it's in the grocery store, can you trust that?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Our labels have been so manipulated. I mean, when I ran a USDA slaughterhouse and we had to submit for labels and you had to submit affidavits and so forth, and it's a loose process. So anybody that's in a big corporation, it's not hard for them to label how they want. I mean,
Wow.
we were even trying to get them to label their product if it was given mRNA vaccines, and they shot that down because it would dissuade consumers from purchasing.
What?
Duh.
That's the point. Like,
Yeah.
wait, so you mean they could be, when you're getting meat from the store, they could be shot up with these antibiotics and we not have a clue what's in them? And is that
Yeah.
getting transferred to us?
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, the antibiotics, they have, on antibiotics specifically, they have a standoff point where the industry has said after this much time, It's gone. You don't have to worry about it. Just like the hormone conversation. So that's the same discussion there. But
Mm.
specifically around the mRNA vaccine for livestock, it has been approved for pork and chicken. It has not been approved for beef yet. So if you're buying pork and chicken, it's probably been injected with the mRNA, especially pork. The pork industry in America is 100%, other than right from the small producers, it's China. Smithfield owns China, and they own basically like 80 or 90% of our pork industry in America.
Mm-hmm.
So
So is that getting transferred to us? Like if we decided we didn't want to take an mRNA vaccine, how is that affecting humans that's consuming this?
my understanding, listen to these other guys that are experts, is that it can be. I mean, you're already talking about shedding, right? If the mRNA vaccine can be transferred just simply by shedding, then it's probably likely through meat. So
Man, okay, that's really scary. And you're saying that we can talk directly to the farmers
yes,
that we want to purchase from, and we will find out. And do y'all have any sort of vetting process though with these farmers that we can trust that the answers we're getting
yeah,
is
yeah.
is real?
Yeah, that's a fair question and a great one. We interview every farmer that comes onto our platform to verify that they are a family-owned operation.
Mm-hmm.
It is the consumer's job to build trust. I can't possibly vet and verify every producer. Our goal was to make it simpler for you to find them, right? My family being 5 generations of ranchers, they don't have time to go out and do all this marketing to introduce themselves to everybody. So we're trying to take that on for our producers and get the consumer right next to them, and then you ask the questions. A big part
Fair.
of Yeah, and a big part of our operation too on the consumer side is to teach them what to ask. But it is about building that relationship, so you know who you're. I mean,
Oh,
the
that's great. Yeah,
yeah,
I think that's fair. I think that's the best. That's the best you
yeah,
can do. Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, I think that's awesome. Okay, so let me see here. Oh, that's a good one. How can consumers tell the difference between local pasture raised beef versus imported or factory farmed beef in grocery stores?
That's you almost can't. Now,
Okay.
if you go to the grocery store, on the label there's a circle. It's called the USDA bug. And every USDA bug has a number on it that is directly associated to the slaughterhouse that comes from, right? So that's how they trace it. So you as the consumer, the only way you're going to know is to go look up that number, see what facility it comes out of and who owns it. And if you find out that it's JBS or Morfrig or Cargill or Tyson, it's likely imported. If
Okay.
you go on fromthefarm.org, they will never be imported.
Do you have you ever heard of that app? It's Think Dirty is the one that I use. There's a ton of them now. There's like apps for the water where you can scan the barcode and it
Yeah.
pops all this stuff up. Is that feature available yet on From the Farm where we'll be able to in our app just scan something and
Yeah.
instantly see where it comes from? Is that where you guys are headed?
In the future, it will. So right now, we're focused on the consumer direct side.
Yeah.
We will eventually have our producers that have extra to sell into wholesale, like
Mm-hmm.
restaurants or local grocery stores. When we get to that point, then we will have those sort of traceability things, so that if you just go into your local, fresh food store, you can scan anything through our program and find out where it comes from.
Okay, that's a great one. Okay, what's a question you wish more consumers would ask their butcher or meat provider before buying?
Mm. I think consumers should ask how they can save the most money buying their meat direct. That will lead them to a conversation about buying cow shares, quarter, halves, and wholes.
Mm-hmm.
People assume that buying direct is too expensive, and it is if you want to buy an individual steak. Why? Because that producer has to slaughter the
Yep.
animal, have all kinds of extra freezer space to hold it, and sell it out by the piece, which requires more labor and more inputs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Power for the freezers, all of the things, management, and so forth. They can save consumers a lot of money $1,000 or more if you buy a whole animal at once. And this used to not be a foreign concept. This is we used to have our meat that way. We had it in bulk so we could eat it throughout the year. And consumers have just forgotten that that's an option. When you buy a quarter, half, or whole, you're saving hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, and you're building food security in your own home because you have your own deep freezer to go to when you need it.
Man, my husband and I went carnivore for a time. Greatest I've ever felt in my entire life. And we did that. My dad actually bought a half a cow.
Yep.
Split it up between himself, my sisters, and I. And I was like, this is going to be great. We have all this meat, on hand right here. Our freezer, we didn't know this, but the breaker went out and it was out in our garage. We wake up the next morning, all of that meat is ruined. I didn't even have the heart to tell my dad that happened. It killed me. I'm like, we just bought all of this meat and had it stored. And I'm like, we got to put a safeguard in place for that. That's happened before with my dad and all of his venison meat as well. But oh man, that hurts so bad, losing all of that meat,
Yeah. And we wired our freezers up to our garage door. So if the garage door doesn't open, we know the freezers are off. But
smart.
Getting freezer alarms and all those kinds of things. And one thing I'll say right now too, for consumers that are interested in this, with the tariffs that are coming, if you've been thinking about buying a quarter, half, or whole and you need to get a deep freezer, get it now. I don't know what's going to happen to the electronics, in our nation, but I'm assuming that a lot of these, look what happened during COVID when we were selling, when COVID hit, all of a sudden everybody became hyper focused on their local food. The problem was we couldn't get slaughter because the supply chain couldn't sustain that massive switch. And also you could not buy a deep freeze. They were sold out. People panic bought and they went, holy crap, the store doesn't have anything. So they snatched up all these deep freezers. You couldn't get them. It was like 6 to 9 months before you could even get a deep freeze.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Those and the generators, man. Those were the things that until you need it, most people aren't thinking about them. So our eyes got opened a lot during COVID, that's for sure. So AJ, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I would love to have you come back on again in the future, but why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and where they can get signed up for From the Farm as well?
Yeah, great. Fromthefarm.org. You can get on our email list if there's nobody in your area yet and you just kind of want to stay present and monitor as we scale. Would invite you to do that. You can follow us on all the socials. From the Farm USA is all of our socials across everything. We do have a crowdfunding campaign going right now on WeFunder. We've got a lot of interest in this from the wrong parties. We're being very cautious with where the money comes from because if we actually have a chance to make a difference, somebody's going to ruin it if the wrong people are involved. So we've raised over $350,000 from 350 investors up to this point. And so if you're interested in helping us build this new food system, wefunder.com/from the farm is where we're doing that.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And I look forward to having you back on again in the future.
Me as well. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, AJ.